Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Good. You haven't left yet.
Nope, I'll leave Saturday morning. I thought
Ooh.
we went on the phone. I'm like, wait a minute, did I? I'm like, is this the right day, the right time?
Yeah, I just got busy cooking some squash casserole and it's like, whoops, gotta throw that guy in the oven. And then they keep coming. It's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's like, no, no more. So the 16th, if you're here, we're gonna do the outdoor worship, and I'm guessing there's gonna be um, people who have extra garden stuff to give away. So there might be a big
Oh,
free for all on the
so
16th.
is it still gonna be at 10 o'clock, right?
Yeah, but it might be fun to have a extra table or something. And I guess that would be the only furniture out there because everybody brings their own chair. Bring a table. Hello, everybody, and we're doing a little bit different Bible study tonight, using some of the Bible study from our denominational moderator, Paul Mundy. And um, he's been called to be moderator for 2 years because the COVID wouldn't allow us to let him be the moderator this year. So he's going to hang in there for another year. I think he might be the right person for this time that we're in. And he's talking about it is no secret the church is often conflicted and polarized. So, anybody have any agree or disagree with that statement?
I would agree.
And why? Why is it that it's because we differ in our understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm trying to move my chat out of the way here. Um, is our kingdom for here on earth as it is in heaven? So we seem to have ways to fight about way too many things in the denomination. Sometimes I wonder why we can't focus on what we agree on. Do we have do we have um, things that are there more things that we agree on or more things that we disagree on in the church of the brethren?
I'd like to think that there are more things that we agree on, but right now we're letting this gay issue divide us, tear us apart.
Right. What us and I don't know how many denominations can we count?
Almost all of them have either split or are going to split over it.
Right. So um, yeah, certainly we're watching other denominations closely, but no one seems to have been done this with a great fix. The Presbyterian split a few years ago. Um, the Methodists are in the midst of a split. I think they're not decided they're splitting yet. So um, the gospel's archenemy is sin. So that's what I hope that we agree on. And then either life after death or life after birth. So sin is going to be our arch enemy no matter what part of our life that we're in. So are we going to be living with Christ while we're here on earth? Are we going to be living with Christ after we die on leave this earth? That's kind of the big question, I think. So what I like about this is this next paragraph. Someone want to read that first two um, that paragraph.
Which
Sorry.
one, Gail?
That but it starts with here's the rub.
But here's the rub. Sin is not only individual, but systemic, not only personal, but societal. Thus, as we preach the gospel is not only good news for sinners, but those sinned against, specifically those sinned against by principalities and powers foreign to God. Systemic expressions of inequity, such as racism, loom large, blighting individuals and networks, sinning against vast numbers of people, of persons, and in turn, the holiness, greatness, power, truth, wisdom, beauty, goodness, faithfulness, promises, commandments, justice, and person of God.
Okay, so um, if we only have an understanding as sin as being this vertical breach between me and God, then I can pretty much say I haven't sinned against um, my neighbor that I know of, so I'm okay. But if I look at I haven't sinned against God that I know of because I've been forgiven. But if I don't ever ask, have I sinned against my neighbor by how things have been kind of stacked against my neighbor, then I might not even realize that there are sins in my life that haven't even been identified. So, what I was hoping to do is see if the questions that look at this conversation are going to be helpful in looking at um, some of our issues in the Church of the Brethren. I don't know if I can type on this. And one I wanted to start with is one that I've added of my own. And see if this one is helpful to get the conversation started. Learn the most. So, does that resonate with anybody? What are the times in my life that I've learned the most about God's love? Anybody have an example of when they were felt that they were especially learning or about God's love or lessons, perhaps? When I think things are going swimmingly, I've noticed that I'm not learning a whole lot. Does anybody else notice that in their life as well?
Who wants to be challenged? We'd rather drift along. We
Ooh,
don't want anybody rocking the boat.
is that when you learn the most about God?
No, it isn't.
Yeah, one of the times I learned the most about God, Larry, was when I was your neighbor living in Nigeria. There were a lot of things rocking the boat when I was trying to figure out how do you even buy your vegetables. You had to bargain for everything that you ate, and how do you even learn how to do? How do you even learn how to survive in a culture that's very different?
So did you call upon God to keep strong?
Yeah, I figured that the only thing I could count on was that there was going to be God was going to send the sun up in the morning and the sun down at night, and I could count on that. But whether you had water that day or electricity that day, or whether your food was rotting in the refrigerator because the electricity was out for a week, you just never knew. So it was always a learning lesson for me. I think I did a lot more devotions than other times in my life. So has anybody else figured out that difficult times are times when they've grown in their own personal life?
Well, when I had my issues with my brain tumor, very definitely.
Yeah. What an amazing challenge that was to health and to survival and to your existence even. What
And
did you
my prayer was that I grew as a result of it, but it was my prayer that it was having a profound effect on my brothers and their wives and their children too.
I think your prayer might have been answered, Larry. What do you think?
I'm sure it was. These days, you wonder whether or not they've forgotten what God's mighty acts were back then.
Right. Um, we we see mighty acts in the scriptures. God parts the Red Sea. God heals the cripple. Jesus turns water into wine. And it seems like if we don't have one of those um, miraculous stories, we forget. It's like we have to have reminders all the time. Welcome, Vivian. Whoops, she's muted. There she is. Welcome. So we're looking at some of the Paul Mundy questions. Um, the next question says, Moderator Paul affirms the gospel is good news for both life after death and life after birth. Citing scripture passages to document your conviction. I don't know that we've gotten to the scripture passages, but I think we're talking about how God has been good news when things were really difficult, even though you wished it would go away. Maybe there was some reason that God was helping to use to see another way of living in the midst of a struggle. So Larry had an example. I was talking about Nigeria, how I learned a lot in the difficult times. And I don't know, Vivian, if you have any examples. I don't know if they can hear. So, yeah, getting unmuted. Oh, I can't hear you yet. We can't hear Vivian yet.
We're still trying to get on.
Now you got on.
I'm on, but I got to get Lyle on.
Oh, okay, okay. So, earlier in the article, it talks about Piper's listing of the results of sin. So here's the quote about Piper. Where's his quote? Where does he go?
Oh, I got a low battery.
Oh, where's Piper's quote? Let's see. Oh, here, John Piper itemizes the atrocity sin is. Someone want to read that that paragraph? Sin is, and it gives all these categories. Starting over here.
Starting with the gospel's arch enemy, is that what you're referring to? Oh.
Right down here, the glory of God, sin is, and then colon.
The glory of God not honored, the holiness of God not reverenced, the greatness of God not admired, the power of God not praised, the truth of God not sought, the wisdom of God not esteemed, the beauty of God not treasured, the goodness of God not savored, the faithfulness of God, not trusted, the promise of God, not believed, the commandments of God, not obeyed, the justice of God, not respected, the wrath of God, not feared, the grace of God, not cherished, the presence of God, not prized, the person of God, not loved.
Okay, can you identify how that might be true in your experience? Have you seen that happen in the society that we're living in?
A lot of it. I mean, the way we, if you think we're supposed to be kind to each other, you know, the goodness of God not savored. I think kindness and goodness goes together.
Right. The
Um,
goodness of God not savored.
the beauty of God not treasured. We're all unique people, not respecting that uniqueness for each one of them. To me that's treasuring who
Right.
you are as a person.
Is God in the midst of every human being? Can we see God in the midst of a stranger? Yeah. So Larry, this was your question whether your nieces and nephews or relatives remembered all of these truths that you were talking about. Do we remember the goodness of God? What God did for me last week? We seem to have a short memory on that one. Oh, what did God do for me last week? I can't remember. The commandments of God not obeyed. Oh my gosh. It looks like the all you have to do is turn on the news for some of these. Someone want to talk about what commandments they don't see being obeyed. I got to run to take something out of the oven while it beeps at me. I'll be right back.
Well, I guess right now, probably love thy neighbor as you love yourself. When you see everything that's going on, that one might be a challenge.
Oh, I missed that. What was that, Kathy?
I was just stating, love thy neighbor as you love thyself. That's sort of a tough one right now when you turn on the TV.
Right, right, right.
Like, wow, a lot of angst in the world against that at the moment.
Right. So, yeah, are we to yeah, that you shall love your neighbor, you shall honor your mother and father, you shall love God, and yeah, it seems like we've not gone down that path so well. Love your enemy. So when I saw the funeral for John Lewis, it seemed like he was living in a whole nother mindset of the rest. You know, he was the conscience of the House of Representatives, and he seemed to live in a whole nother mindset than people around him. He wasn't like steered off into petty arguments or to be drugged down into um, political dirt. He didn't badmouth other people. He seemed to be wholly on this other vision of what the House of Representatives could look like, and he kept on that journey while other people would um, berate him or belittle him, or they thought he was um, insignificant or whatever, and then his body lies in state on um, the same platform that Abraham Lincoln laid on. So, it's like, wow, that was impressive to me. the presence of God was among in his life. But look at people who are following in the path of addiction. They have a real hard struggle with being in the path where something else doesn't take over their life. I have to get my next drug of choice in order to survive. So God can't be the number one in their life if they're struggling after addictions. So then it talks about sin is not only individual but systemic, and we preach against not only good news for sinners but those who've been sinned against. So do we have examples of people that we are in contact who have been sinned against, that that we are that we can identify in our own society, in our own communities?
I have a relevant example of a book I'm reading right now called The Color of Law, and it goes back to the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, and it talks about once the Civil War was over and the slaves were freed, how they were given those rights, but other laws did not really follow the Constitution. And it traces back from then the inequity in housing all up to now. It's a fascinating book, and it was not segregated by just Democrats or Republicans. It was across the board, and it made me think about when I started in my career. I still saw restrictions on properties as to that it could not be sold to someone of African descent, and it was just fascinating. And I'm like, is that a sin against society? Yeah, pretty much.
And your job, you want to explain to people what your job is?
I'm a compliance officer for a mortgage company. So as a company, we're taking a step back and saying, like, with everything that's going on, what can we do differently? And the whole legal team is reading this particular book. It's fascinating, and about how can we think about what we do differently, and what can we do to help move that a little bit farther, or I mean closer to some equity in regards to housing.
So why were some people allowed mortgages and other people were denied?
Yeah, I mean, and I know some of you guys on the phone might remember this, but I did not know this, that the African Americans that came back from fighting World War II, their white counterpart could get a loan from VA at 100% no financing. The black person could not. They fought side by side, and so this whole book talks about how that has built and built and built. So it's a very fascinating book, but when you said that, it's like, yeah, systemic, yes, hundreds of years of that.
Right. So I got a text from Barbara Avant in our congregation, and we were talking about Oakland is trying to do things differently with getting um, their police they're evaluating the police differently and not doing all these racial profiling. Like if you're a black person driving a car, you're going to get pulled over. So they were trying to respond to that, and so she read a book called Black Pioneers, seeing what happened to people who were pioneers way back in the day, and people coming to California had a totally their experience was that they might have gotten a claim as a minor, but they would be robbed of that claim. It would just be stripped away, and they would get they might possess land, but they would get pushed off their land by some illegal means. And so there was a totally different pioneer experience if you were a black person than if you were a white person. Just like Kathy, that book that you're saying, the the problem is that some of us haven't heard any of these stories if we didn't have, if we weren't a Black person who came back from World War II, we might not have ever heard these stories.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know that about Black veterans either. And what is that called? The GI Bill?
Right. They were not allowed to participate.
Wow.
And this was not the Church of the Brethren, so I want to say that with caveat, but the number of churches that supported, they put money behind these subdivisions and such so that they were white only. It's very sad. I mean, when I'm looking at, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope it's not the Church of the Brethren. But I had to go. It wasn't, but I'm like, that's very sad.
So that's it. That was a legal thing that denominations were working to do.
Yep.
Oh man, I didn't know that either. I got to read this book.
It's fascinating. It's just a very, very interesting book. Very makes you feel very sad.
The Color of Law.
The Color of Law.
Wow. So pretty eye-opening.
It has been for me, and I've worked in this business for a very long time. And I'm like, wow.
Wow. So there are people sinned against, and we wonder, how come we haven't heard their stories? I wonder why we haven't heard their stories. Have we have people tried to share their stories with us?
I would say in some instances we're not interested in listening. Personal
Yeah.
opinion.
So Barbara Avant texted me, and she said, if we were raised in an environment where you believe that God had, people that were more favored than others, and that they were taught that there were people who were that they weren't as important to God. It's, people of color weren't as important. Then you'd have to undo all the things that you've learned in your childhood, and then try to undo that. And it's like, I don't want to listen to something that makes me think back through all of my beliefs and re-examine them. No one really wants to have to go through that, right? So that's pretty much what we might be in the midst of. So they also talk about the avoid the mistakes of the social gospel movement. So when they talk about there is a social gospel movement inferred that God's kingdom is built by us. But as Elise Daniel goes, it's not. Every part of the kingdom, from its establishment to its construction and eventual consummation, is carried out by Christ. Yes, Christ uses us in this endeavor, but we aren't building the kingdom. God is building it and using us. So some people have been really upset to say that that there's such thing as a societal part of the gospel, and it's not the same thing as saying that the kingdom is built by us, but it's trying to say that the kingdom is using us to build it. So, are there things in the social gospel movement that are that we're trying to that are problematic in our walk with Jesus? Are we trying to do it all ourselves? Do we see that in our Church of the Brethren? We have some. If I preach the gospel, but I don't talk about how God has changed my life personally, I think I've lost much of the gospel that can help people. So how do I talk to people about sin if I don't include the personal sin? And how do I talk to people about sin if I don't include societal sin? Is anybody looking at what's what the church is saying about both of those? Do we have a church that looks at both societal and personal sin?
Does the church talk about sin that much?
Do we talk about sin at all?
Right. It seemed to me like there were certain mission denominations in Nigeria that they were always talking about sin.
Right. So they were American denominations sent over to Nigeria, right?
Right. And they talked about sin a lot.
And which kind of sin do you think they were talking about mainly? Personal sin or societal sin?
Probably personal.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. And what happens if you bring up societal sin? Is that allowed?
I think if you bring up societal sin, people should start taking more responsibility.
Oh, what? I would have to take some responsibility.
Because if it's personal, it's all the other person, right?
Right.
It's always somebody else, as opposed to societal. You're probably part of it.
Yeah, you'd have to examine.
Right.
So, um, if I do personal sin, then then I can then I can go to God and say, I've repented. I want to be forgiven, and then start over with a clean slate, right? So I can do personal sin and still be forgiven. Societal sin, I might have to do some extra hard work, maybe. Like your office is doing something hard, aren't they, Kathy?
It's an eye opener.
And they're going to have to think about changing their policies.
That's what we're discussing, yes.
You think they will actually do something about changing policies?
I can tell you that from the very top down, they're very engaged in it at the moment. It'll be interesting to see where we're at in a year.
In a year. So yeah, how long
Does it?
how long does it take?
I mean, if it's something that's been going on for almost 200 years, it's not going to take overnight.
Right. Right.
So it's very interesting.
And if I how long does God wait patiently for me to stop sinning? 200 years maybe? I don't I don't know. So does the Church of the Brethren, so Kathy, you're new to the church. Does the Church of the Brethren have talked, had anything to say about sin since you have been exposed to the church so far?
I'd say not that I recollect. No.
That's interesting. So, um, what what is the definition of sin?
Well, I would say doing something ungodly.
Right. I think of it as something that separates us from being close to God. So, so personal sin certainly includes things that would separate us from being close to God. And if we stop there, I think we might have not given it the full benefit it needs. How can my treatment of other persons around me separate me from being close to God, doing being being part of the GI Bill and other people being left behind, or feeling like they were mistreated.
Right.
I'm sure that if I did research, I would find out that the land that I'm living in was probably belonged to a Native American tribe, and how did they lose that land? I didn't steal it from them, but maybe I benefit from all of that that happened upon the land that I'm living on. So maybe the point is, how do we keep ourselves from being separated from God?
We need to be open to the leading of the Holy Spirit at all times.
So I think that includes some of what Kathy read about um, treasuring God's beauty, God's savoring God's goodness, um, believing in God's promises, yeah, obeying the commandments, um, cherishing God's grace. Do we have any instruction on how to do that?
Or maybe a start, 10 Commandments, thou shalt.
Right. 10 Commandments don't get talked about all that much, do they? They're kind of like, oh yeah, 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 oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So they probably would keep us from falling into a whole lot of trouble if we were able to keep the 10 Commandments in front of us, not go down the road. Do not covet your neighbor's goods. That would probably keep us from some societal ills as well. So, what's the end point of this then? In the end, as Revelation points out, God creates a new God does not create a new world, but recreates our current world. How does such an emphasis on new creation, all things new, bring hope amid our current sense of crisis and disorder? Does anybody see crisis and disorder going on?
Plenty.
Right. So, is there anything that would be giving us any kind of is there a new awareness about what's going on?
I think if you're open to it, there is. If you are closed to it, it won't make a difference. I think
Well,
it's within yourself, right? Because you have individuals like, oh, this isn't important, and then you have the group that says it's important, right? But that's coming from internal.
right. Nobody can make me think it's important, right?
Right.
If there's a new way of doing things.
And after all, I'm smart. I have all the answers. Quit bugging me.
Um, I think you should be president of the United States then, maybe. Right. So don't bother me with the facts or with new information. What about all things new? Do you see something new happening amongst us?
I long for the day that all things new will come and there will be peace. But that may not happen till God calls me home.
There will be peace
And the
and
world will still continue and be a mess.
yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if there were peace and there were enough for all to go around?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't see all of the things that are happening except when there's when the lid gets ripped off, then we're seeing people are saying, how come, well, today we just learned in our deacon meeting that those families that have money are hiring private teachers so that their kids can stay home. Well, what does that do for the rest of the kids who are still ordered to go to school or still have to be in an unsafe environment where they might get sick or bring it home? So that doesn't seem like we have um, created a just world for everybody to live in. What what would um, what would God do? What would God have us do with schools and kids having to go to school? What's Fort Collins going to do? Do you guys know what's up going to happen in the school system?
They're going to be online until middle of October after the first 9 weeks
And then reassess.
and reassess. Yes.
So that
Now, our
means,
granddaughter Tegan is out at Windsor Charter Academy, and their kids are coming in up through grade 5.
what grade is
De-
what grade is she teaching?
She's teaching first grade.
Oh my.
Denver schools now are not going to be, they're going to be online till the middle of October for sure, as they said on the news tonight.
And the Loveland schools have decided, the Thompson School District, Loveland, are going all online just like Fort Collins till the middle of October.
So someone is going to be economically harmed by that, right?
Very much so.
And
Those families that, where both work outside the home and they have younger students.
yeah, who's going to be watching over the kids at home, right? So
Trying to get that to,
is there a place for those kids? Are they? Is there a legal um, law that says those kids have to have a responsible adult if they're online school? I can't. I don't know what is the teacher supposed to be watching those kids from the video chat room? Vivian, stop that! Don't hit your brother. I don't know what that's supposed to look like. So we have, yeah, till October. I'm thinking there's going to be some really tough decisions families are going to have to make. Oh boy. I guess if parents are working from home, that might be one thing, but if parents have to go into work um, at the essential jobs that don't pay a whole lot, then they can't stay home and be watching their kids. So maybe that's a place where the church might have to be thinking about how to step in. I hadn't thought about this before. Is there something the church could provide for those families that are desperate?
It's an interesting concept because you're right. All the workers that have to go in with those kids who do not have daycare, it's they. I mean, I can tell you from where I work, people are stressed out about that. Not, and they get to work at home, but they still want their kids to learn. Even the ones that are either work remotely, because then you're trying to work and teach your kids.
Right.
And I couldn't imagine doing that. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. I guess you go on mute an awful lot if your kids are at home.
So yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, what type of resources can people offer for that? And the kids, if parents might not be the best teachers, might be a great parent, might not be a good teacher.
Right.
It's an interesting dynamic.
And unfortunately, there are lots of dysfunctional families out there,
Yep.
and the
Right.
kids suffer.
Yep.
Right.
Society suffers as a result.
Sometimes the safest place is at the school building itself for those kids that are
Yes.
struggling. So Deanna is she's been in the school system, your daughter, and she won't be working for the school system. Is that right, Donna? Oh, we can't hear you.
She has been a sub
Oh, a sub.
almost full time.
Oh, we couldn't hear that. So she's been a sub, but we lost the rest.
She is a sub and many times would be about full time at it, but when students are online, there's no way she subs. So, but she feels good about being able to help and check on the kids at home.
Yeah. Wow. So, it seems like neighbors might have to be checking on neighbors with kids and picking up on um, some of those callings that you never thought you'd have to do because the school was there for all the kids, but it's maybe not going to be there for the kids. We might have to be looking out for the well-being of those who live around us. So we'll see what opportunities there are to. I mean, we're supposed to be the church of good news, and so maybe this will be an opportunity to bring good news and to help eliminate sin in our own lives and in the lives of the society. So my daughter works at a um, homeowners association where they have a building, and they just said that they're going to rent out their building for online learners. So little kids who have nowhere to go during the day when their parents are working can come into small areas where they have the same kids together in a small area in a different area. And so there's going to be a hired person to make sure that these kids are having access on, having access online, and things are working well for them to use their computers and stuff. So there'll be an adult in the room, and then the adult will be a trained teacher who will help them at recess and help them through their online day.
That's a great idea.
And it's not provided by the school. It's just somebody else providing that. And I'm going, I wonder how much that costs.
Wow. What a wonderful idea.
I know. I was thinking, I bet they have a long line of people wanting to sign up. So we'll see what happens. Well, I think we're coming to our close. Have any of these questions been helpful or of any insight to you? Because I'm hoping to see if any of these questions will help in our district as we walk through our differences. Can you give me any feedback about what question might be useful when we talk as the entire district?
I'd like to think that once this election season is over, that we might have less turmoil in our churches and in our families and in our land. But it's probably just a pipe dream.
Turmoil is a good word.
And I find that I struggle with, if there's somebody who's on the opposite side and they're saying something, I have a hard time appreciating their words of wisdom.
Right. So, what conversations have gone well with person who thinks differently? Can you think of any conversations that have gone well when you're trying to hear other people? Maybe they all went not so well. I don't know.
I guess I have a tendency to keep my mouth shut, but in my mind then mutter under my breath and say, I wonder what that person's been drinking.
I guess a
Or
question would be of the conversations, what of the conversations you have heard, have you changed your thought process or your beliefs in any way?
Yeah.
Did they make you different or
So
think different?
so this book is like that you're reading is like a conversation with someone who's making you think differently.
Yeah,
And have I had a chance to have a conversation that has done the same for me?
right.
Yeah.
we had a visitor 10 days ago or so who was going on, and I thought, how can you even listen to that discussion?
He was quoting a discussion from other people's discussion.
There's a well-known talk show person,
Oh, yeah.
and in my mind, they are sick when they listen to that person,
Right.
because I'm prejudiced, very much so.
Evidently, some people listen to this well-known person.
Day in and day out, and just absorb all this, in my mind, garbage.
Yeah. And reinforce the garbage. Yeah. Reinforces that same thinking over and over.
And in their mind, once the election is over, the virus will disappear overnight.
Oh, wow.
Wow, yes. I see a new world coming.
Oh boy. Well, and the election's gonna solve that?
Yep.
Oh my. So what happens if the election comes and it doesn't get solved? That person has doesn't bother their faith at all, I guess.
Well, I would think it would, but time will tell.
Right. Yikes. Well, I appreciate your interesting insights. Um, anyone, Vivian, you want to unmute and share anything?
I was thinking of something that's left my brain at the moment. I think it left me.
Yeah, we have people who listen to things that hook, line, and sinker. They just kind of go right along with.
I know one of the things I was thinking, if that's going to disappear with the election, we should move the election up and have it fast. Yeah.
A good point. I will vote for that. Oh, do we? Yeah. Does it matter if we vote by mail or in person?
Depends on which state you're in, I think.
Yeah. Mm. Well,
Colorado did a good job.
right. We haven't had much voter fraud that they can point to in our state, at least. Oh boy. Well, I appreciate everyone being on this call. This is helpful to try to move into what we can do as a district and trying to live the gospel. And our job is to help build the kingdom. So it means that we don't do it ourselves. I totally agree with that, but God uses us to help build the kingdom. So I will try to get this to stop recording. Maybe I'll have to, it never seems to be on the screen whenever I need to stop share. There we go. So thanks everybody, and we will see you in a week.
All right. Thank you, Gail.
Okay.
You're still recording.
Oops, I'm still recording.